So I'm Jessica Gardenhire. I graduated from Cornell University in 2014. I am from Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm in Cleveland right now for quarantine, but I currently live in the Bay Area. So I have 6 years of experience in San Francisco, and I did mostly commercial work. So I'd say that the first company I worked for did big box architecture. So we did a lot of master planning, campus planning for people like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and but on the developer side. And then we also did tenant improvements and research and development labs as well. And I have recently switched into doing high-rise multi-residential, and I've been working in that for very little time. I'm learning that right now. So a few of the thoughts that came to my mind as far as sharing my experience was thinking about what my life was growing up in the suburb that I did and having the expectations I had as far as what it was going to be like to be an architect, the people who were architects and the examples that I saw in my life, and the diversity of college and contrasting that with the working world. So I'd say that, so my father's an electrician. I'm from a suburb called Strongsville in Cleveland, Ohio. And I will admit that it is a predominantly white suburb. I had a class of, I want to say 800 kids. We broke a record when I went with my freshman class, and I was one of 6 Black. So, I'm sorry. My headphone is changing. Okay. So I grew up very much so able to master being in predominantly white spaces, which I think worked to my advantage. I think between whether it was my experience in church, my parents are ministers of an interracial and an international church. So between that, as well as, I was raised in very good situations to be able to navigate the dynamics of the world in that way. But as comical as it will sound, Cornell University was the most diverse space I'd ever been in my life. I know that you probably would not expect that at all, but I remember I got accepted into a program that I didn't realize was a minority focused program. And I walked in and didn't even know how to interact with that many people of color that weren't my relatives. and I'm glad I had that experience. I think that it was very healthy as far as me learning to love and accept myself as a Black woman. Cause I can't say I got that growing up in such a Caucasian suburb. And I can contrast it with my sister's college experience. She went to Miami of Ohio, which is same demographic as my high school, like almost a clone. So I can attest to the fact that going to a diverse school, even if it is an Ivy League school, and then definitely not as diverse as an HBCU, it meant a lot for me, and it helped me gain quite a lot of confidence. But even within that institution, there was a lot of imposter syndrome, and there was a lot of problematic behavior that I saw behind the scenes. And I had the right people in my corner and the right people to advocate for me. But I saw classmates, especially even in the architecture program, that between the lack of representation and also just very bizarre policing and grading policies just did not, it was very evident that preferential treatment was not given to a lot of the African American men in my class. It was blatantly obvious to me, at least, and it just shocked me that the pattern could continue the way it did for so long. And then to contrast that with the working world, it was almost like I had very high expectations of San Francisco, especially being from Cleveland. And in Cleveland, I knew what to expect. In the South, I knew what to expect. My mom's from Tennessee. My dad's side is from, I have a lot of family in Georgia, so I knew what to expect in the South. But I figured going to San Francisco, it was going to be so similar to Cornell as far as it being a very diverse, inclusive environment. And I will admit, I faced a lot of challenges, like things I thought I would not have to deal with unless I moved down south. And it took other friends making me realize how extreme some of the incidents that I had to deal with at work were. And I won't dive into that at the moment, but I guess one of the things that I learned from that experience was that there's no right way to respond in the moment to whether it's minorly or extremely aggressive, whether it's in your face racism or just those subtle things every single day. I learned that I didn't know how to deal with that in the professional world. I didn't know how to speak up about it and call it out. And it was extremely distracting. I'd walk in and I'd feel like heat on my neck. I'd feel like a heaviness on my shoulders and just so much alertness and awareness that my every move was being watched at a certain point in this company. And it wasn't always a place of negativity that watching was coming from, but it was a very constant othering. So I started a company in the Bay Area of 160 people, and I was for most of my time there, I was the only African-American. There was one civil engineer who was an African-American woman. Also she went to Stanford, like an incredibly smart woman. And she left after a very short time because she was like, something's just not right. And one of my other coworkers was, he was biracial, but he knew that he could pass as white, so he never spoke up or advocated in situations. And that didn't bother me. I understand where he was coming from, but there were a lot of very odd situations where it would have meant a lot at work if someone had at least been like, that was weird. And I was very thankful that towards the end of my time there, that there was incredible sexual harassment training where they actually talked about race. And usually sexual harassment training is a complete joke. and it's these videos from like 1995 that you're like, it causes more problem than good. But the training was actually very good, but my coworkers' responses were still very hurtful and triggering to even to the really good training. They were just like, it was in regards to a Title IX law, as far as not being able to discriminate against hair in the workplace and identifying microaggressions, because that law had just passed in California, maybe sometime between when our sexual harassment training it had already passed. So they had to go over it in the training, and the woman did an incredible job giving examples, but there was a lot of whataboutism in the room. And I eventually just had a small breakdown as far as like, I was listening through webinar because I was remote that day. And I just kind of had to tell everyone, I'm like, each and every one of you have done this to me in this company at some point in time. You need to stop trying to find a way around listening to her and actually listen. And HR thanked me later. So I think that was, I think there were a lot of times I did not speak up for myself in my 5 years at the company. But I think that the things I took away from it are that you're never going to know how to respond when someone says something blatantly insane to you in the moment. It's not a point of weakness to not know how to quench it in the moment. I had some psychotic things said to me, from everything from me being damned to hell in front of everybody to being called like the N-word in a public meeting. So or I should say being interrogated about it and needed to keep my composure and just be like, what point is this proving? And I am very thankful that I kept my composure during every situation. And it just proved to me that I think this industry in general, and Cornell proved this to me as well, that I think our industry protects bad apples too much. Maybe I shouldn't say bad apples, but their architects are known to be psychotic, and it's almost honored in some ways, especially my experience at Cornell. It's almost like the crazier you are as a tenured professor, the more they're like, oh, that's just how that person is. They've been doing this for years. And it really did create a terrible mental health environment. Just it's architecture is hard enough to try to learn in school how to get a good grade based off of opinion. So it's a double fold when that person's opinion that you're trying to gain approval of is is acting bipolar or acting unpredictable. And unfortunately, my time at that school was full of a lot of very old school professors who are like, if I went through this, you have to as well. And I had some amazing, great professors, but most of them were visiting. So most of the tenured professors during my time there were very stuck in their ways. And I realized in the working world, I'm like, I think that was my taste of realizing that even in the working world, there are some nut jobs that are protected. And I would say at the company I worked at, it was amazing people. The principals were incredible. And I would work with them again in a heartbeat. The leadership was so great, but there were just a few people at the medium leadership level that they just kept being like, oh, he has a temper tantrum every now and then, let it go. And people would quit over these temper tantrums. I'm like, how do you keep excusing this behavior? And there were a few people that I noticed would have these temper tantrums towards, there was one person in particular who would be totally fine until he was working with an Asian engineer, and he would just flip out. And when I started noticing that behavior, I started to take it to HR. I started to just tell them, I'm like, he doesn't treat this person like this, but he treats all these people like this. If he knows how to work through a problem with all these people of this background, but he can't with people of this other background, what is the pattern? They're like, oh, he's just like that. I'm like, no, it's this person told me that they felt like they were racially attacked. So I started to try to advocate for others in the company as far as calling out the things that I wish that people had called out and verified for me. I wish that someone had spoken up and said that this was too much as I was being interrogated about very non-professional things in a professional meeting by HR. I wish that, because and one of my good friends who's in London said that a very similar thing happened to her as far as her being just constantly drilled about stereotypes. She's from New Jersey and of Japanese descent, and she told me that she like one of her PMs just won't stop asking her if she grew up knowing karate, things like that. And she's like, I never have told you that I know karate. So she confirmed, she's like, yeah, sometimes it just takes someone stepping in and saying like, this joke isn't funny. And I will say that I think that I was very proud of myself in the moment as far as the second sexual harassment training, when people weren't taking it seriously and they were touching on things that I felt I faced a lot in the company, that I was happy that I spoke up and said something, but it was draining. And the next day I started applying for jobs. So and mind you, I had spoken to my higher ups about all these problems before. And I talked to them, and I gave them a list of my problems and grievances, and they reassured me that they wanted me to be principal, that they didn't want me to leave, that they really they're like, no, it's just a few bad eggs. I'm like, get rid of them. So I think the industry needs to do a better job, even in college, of discouraging completely unprofessional behavior. And it can start with something as simple as like the typical architect being able to throw a temper tantrum and throw like coffee against the wall in movies. And I mean, I don't know how many architects are in movies, but I think even things like allowing us to strive for having enough sleep and having a work-life balance can go a long way in encouraging us to treat people sanely. and although I know that this is more of an open forum on race, like I would never sit and call any of my old coworkers racist, but I will say it hurt me when I heard them all say, oh, I missed a good sexual harassment meeting, referring to when I was drilled about the N-word for 10 minutes in front of the company. And in those moments I told them, I was like, how can you sit here with me at happy hour and say that that was something that you wish you had experienced? And if you had experienced it, would you have spoken up for me? Would you have made it stop? And they apologized. So I'm like, you got to understand, like, multiply that by 160 people. Why did how many other people are saying like, oh darn, I would love to ridicule this experience. And I don't think people realize how much it can mean just for someone else to step in, because there's so many thoughts going through the minds of the minority. We have to balance so many things in our mind of like, okay, am I going to be irate if I respond? Am I going to be taken the wrong way? Is it just going to be thrown in my face of like, this isn't a big deal? Or even having someone advocate as far as saying like, this person should have the opportunity to be a designer. They should be in the room for this stuff. I noticed very quickly in San Francisco that I'm like, I don't know a single Black designer. I only know technical architects. Why is it that the African Americans are not able to be the quarterback? They're only able to be, I can't finish that metaphor because I don't know the analogy of a quarterback to an architect versus a technical architect, but they can't, it's very rare that they're steering the ship from the design phase, at least from what I saw and my research in the San Francisco Bay Area. I know maybe one designer at a large firm, and two, I can think of two. But it just became evident to me very quickly that I'm like, okay, this area thinks that they are very much so beyond race. And they think that this is not a problem. And they're like, oh, I'm in California. What? There's no racism here. And I was quickly like, okay, it's just like I'm back in Cleveland.
Wow.
Yeah. Jesus.
I appreciate you sharing.
That's a lot.
No, but it's your life, you know?
Yeah.
It's real. Damn.
Yeah.
And, you know, the very last thing you said really hit, you know, it's the beyond race. It's people that think they're beyond race. So they can say whatever they want. You know, you bring in something and they just think it's your opinion. And it's not fact, right? It can't be them because they're beyond that, you know? And I feel like I recognize a lot of what you're saying, but there's this additional layer that I just don't see. And so that was really powerful.
And by all means, I don't know how I am on time. I'm open to questions from other panelists, but
we got 3.5 minutes.
Okay, 3.5 minutes.
So yeah.
So I got a question. So it sounds like as great of well, I guess Cornell was a great experience for you, but it sounds like they didn't fully equip you for what you were going to encounter when you got out into the workplace.
No. I don't think any school does.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, I mean, I think they leave it to your parents or hopefully somebody that pulls you along. And I think the challenge is because there aren't a lot of people that look like us in the design space, who's going to pull you aside, right? I mean, that's the question that you have to ask is who is going to do it? And some people are afraid to go down that road for fear of, you know, dancing in a minefield or saying something that they shouldn't say. And I think that is the real challenge. But that's why I think real talk has to happen early and often with design firm leaders, with the C-suites of these firms, and they need to create what I would call a safe place for you to have real talk without fear of retribution, any type of microaggressions, or any type of implicit bias rearing its ugly head. Because that I think is the real challenge that all of you guys face early on in your careers, because you still have a long career ahead of you. You could do this for another 35, 40. I mean, listen, I know architects that are 78 years of age and they keep telling me I still have some years left. So there's a lot of time ahead, right? You don't want to be dealing with this for the next 30 or 40 years.
No.
That's the thing. And
what I did was I got dinner or lunch, I can't recall, with my friends' bosses. I'll keep this brief. I have like 1 minute. I got lunch with my friends' bosses who were both African-American founders of their own firm, but it was a smaller firm than I wanted to be at, but I used them as a resource to talk to about these issues to find out what is going on? Is this normal? Should I just leave and go back to Ohio? And I took their advice very seriously, and they were like, they said it would be a shame for the profession to lose me, that I was just too talented to to drop away after that experience. And one of them had interviewed at that same firm like 20 years before. And he was like, yeah, just come to any firm downtown. and he was right. I'm at another firm, 0 issues, 0 weird feelings. But I guess like follow your gut is one piece of advice, but it was my first job. And that's like, 2 examples, but it became something where I felt policed. Like I felt very watched. Everything I did, from my hair, my clothes, someone had to make a comment, and some were very sweet and amazing, but others were alarming. Yeah.
And, I also think somebody brought up in the questions, Helen Vasquez said, and to think that San Francisco is sometimes categorized as a bubble from the rest of the U.S. It's still happening here too. Sigh. Yeah, Helen, it's actually happening everywhere. And I was telling somebody the other day, because I'm now in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I came down from Boston, and I was telling some people down here, I said, listen, there's more racism in Boston than there is here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I'm in the heart of the South. So, I think a lot of times people think that, oh, well, if you're on the coast, then you're good, right? Or you're, as long as you're not in these southern states that are somewhat backwards, then you're oblivious to it. But actually, in places like San Francisco, LA, Boston, it can actually be worse. Because it's so underhanded, the type of racism that you encounter, that you don't know whether you're coming or going. You think you're being punked, like you're in a movie or something, like this can't be right. But that's sometimes is the reality that I've heard from other people of color that work in the design space in those major cities. So,
yeah. Okay, so we just hit the 20. So appreciate it, Jessica, and thanks, Randy.
Yeah.
Okay.
She started us off right. That was good, because I think everything that she said, I'm sure a lot of other people are just nodding their heads like, yep, I've either been there or I'm there now. So that was very good.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to leave on a negative note as far as my stories of sharing like the sad side. I guess I can share that that my speaking skills, my ability to handle tension very well, my ability to hold my composure with the client at such a young age really did make it so that I was not on the chopping block in a lot of the situations where people were being unprofessional towards me. I guess like I really had to learn that the proof was in the pudding. And there were situations where I was disappointed I didn't fight and advocate for myself more, but I think like I'm going to try like kill them with kindness, I guess is my advice. End of the day, there were times I really wanted to explode and I had to go, and just like what Randy had said, some of the best advocates I had were people of other color in like, whether it was my engineer, very close friend who was a white woman, whether it was my Latina coworker, whether it was my Asian coworker, all being like, you can talk to me at lunch. So that stuff really helped me work through things and helped me develop relationships within the firm in order to know how to navigate people, because it really is like all firms, big or small, it's politics and it's favoritism, but I think the proof is in the pudding and that it can all be overcome. I don't want you to feel like, and also as a man, hopefully you won't have to deal with some of the stuff we talked about, but it's real. Like it's like people.
But like the hair and everything is like.
Hopefully not as bad.
You look, they make, it is a lot of stuff like, but so. Yeah. It's challenging, but it makes you really go harder. So at the end of the day, I'm very appreciative of all my experiences. Like, and I'm appreciative of the ones that I didn't have to go through, like you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Good. I'm glad you're so hopeful.